Thank you, Mr. President. I've heard several times that the Constitution ought to be revered like the Bible, and I'll have to admit that while I have a great deal of respect for the guys who drafted and framed the Constitution, I don't quite put it in that class myself. And I would ask the senator from Logan if maybe perhaps later he can show me where in the Bible I can't really quote chapter and verse myself, that we would find such a provision in the Bible that God gave to us as a way to modify the Bible in a legitimate fashion. But He gave us a Bible that He said was His Word, and we should stick with that. And the Founding Fathers gave us a Constitution that said that if you ever find that this document is not doing what it needs to do, there are two ways to change this document. And one way has been used 27 times to change the document. So the document itself is not the document that was drafted in 1787. The document is the document that was drafted in 1787 and amended 27 times since that date. And I would point out that the senator from Marshall County, I believe, said that the alternative method of modifying the Constitution or proposing amendments to the Constitution has never been used, and I don't believe that's actually true. The reason why it's not true is because it assumes the only way that second alternative can work is to actually have the convention. And what it neglects to notice is the fact that roughly half of the amendments that we have in the Constitution, counting things like the 17th Amendment, counting things like all of the Bill of Rights, are a direct response to states applying for changes to the Constitution, and Congress, before the number was properly reached to call the convention, recognizing the desire of the states and putting forth the amendments that the states were asking for. And so whether we actually have a convention out of this or not does not mean this can't be effective. We may get to 30 states, and then Congress may well put out some amendments that satisfy the concerns that are addressed in this particular resolution. In fact, I would be surprised if they don't do that. But if they don't do that, then we have to go to convention. It's the only way we're going to straighten out this federal government. I would also point out that 27 changes to the Constitution is probably not really an accurate assessment of what we've had to our Constitution. We've had a lot of decisions, especially in the last 4 or 5 decades, that no person can really find the legitimate basis within the Constitution as to how that particular decision was arrived at. And the reason why we've had those changes is because we currently have a court where 4 of the members read the Constitution and try to view everything in society through the lens of what the document says, and we have 4 members who rarely read the Constitution and always put forth their personal preferences as to what they would like for the Constitution to have said, but which it does not say. And today, we are faced with a perfectly divided, evenly divided court. 4 members who are for the Constitution and 4 members who are for something that most of us would never understand, I think, because of the death of a Supreme Court justice. And I would like to point something out to you. In the last 3 decades that justice sat on the Supreme Court, there have been literally dozens of decisions that were decided on a 5-4 basis. 5-4 where he was in the majority. If this president appoints another Ginsburg to this court, if this president appoints another justice like that, every single one of those 5-4 decisions that this court has arrived at will be flipped on its head. That means the Constitution will be changed literally dozens of times, as it has already been by judicial fiat. We're talking about big issues. We're talking about issues related to religious freedom. We're talking about issues related to free speech. We're talking about issues related to property rights. All of these things are on the table, not based on whether or not 34 states call a convention, not based on whether or not 38 states agree to the convention, but based on whether or not one man can pick somebody who knows how to read. And it's unfortunate that we're in that situation where one man can flip the Constitution back and forth, or one woman can flip the Constitution back and forth. Today it means this, tomorrow it means that. But that's where we are because we have allowed this government to stray so far from that document. Somebody mentioned that a lot of politics today is based on fear, and I think that what we're hearing on the other side of the aisle today is exactly that. It's a lot of noise that's been raised in virtually every line of attack that could be raised, that we should somehow fear exercising something that is contained within our Constitution, that our Founding Fathers knew the day would come. They knew the day would come. The debate around Article 5 was centered on the very question raised by the senator from Ohio. They knew this day would come, just as Scalia in the document that was on our desk today pointed out, that Congress would not do what was necessary. The senator from Harrison County pointed out in the Judiciary Committee, hey, you guys control Congress. Why don't you just go and get those guys to put out a balanced budget resolution? Exactly. They won't do it. And when the Democrats controlled Congress, they won't do it either. And term limits. 75% of the population of the United States for decades in poll after poll has indicated a preference for term limits, and yet Congress will not take up the issue. They won't touch the EPA. They won't touch Obama's overreach when it comes to the immigration system that we have. And the Constitution very clearly says immigration is within the purview of Congress. It says nothing about being within the purview of the President, and yet this President is allowing millions of people to stream across our southern borders. We had a debate the other day related to gun bills where we had senators who thought we should insist that every U.S. citizen, every law-abiding citizen ought to have a background check. But we let these guys stream across the southern border, and we found terrorists in that stream. No background check, no border check, no serious attempt at doing one of the most fundamental things that this government is supposed to do, which is guard our borders. Our situation is dire. We have a $20 trillion almost deficit. We have over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. If it were simply a question of what's in the budget and what's in the deficit and the debt, maybe the balanced budget amendment would be the proper way to go, and I do support that resolution. I hope it makes its way through this body as well. In the last 20 years, the federal government in the Federal Register averaged over 70,000 pages of new rules and regulations and laws in the Federal Register. Over 1.5 million pages in just the last 20 years. If you think about that, a ream of paper is 500 sheets of paper. A box of paper is 10 reams. That's 5,000 sheets in a box. It would take roughly 300 boxes of paper. It would fill that entire area where you are, Mr. President, all the way down through the clerk's pit here. And that just represents the last 20 years of what this federal government has imposed on the citizens of the United States. And we're going to pretend like that is the limited government that is part of the vision that was originally put into the Constitution of the United States of America. 1.5 million sheets of paper that you're responsible for knowing every word. You're responsible. There's no ignorance of the law. You can't claim that. You're responsible for obeying every single word of that 1.5 million pages. This should not be about fear. This should be about recognizing that what's going on out in our country is bordering on chaos. Do you have any idea what national bankruptcy would literally look like in a nation of 330 million people? What's going to happen when that stream of immigrants coming across our southern border decide that they do want to engage in a large-scale terrorist attack? What that's going to look like? We have a government that has totally abdicated its responsibilities while delving into areas where it has no business. This presents an opportunity for the state of West Virginia to be part of the solution in much the same way that the original 13 states came together. They had some issues that needed to be addressed. They came together. They addressed those issues responsibly. As Scalia noted in this piece of paper that is here, the idea that a convention is going to come out with the repeal of the Second Amendment, first, it's outside the scope of this call. This limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, not the citizens. But would such an amendment ever be ratified? Of course it wouldn't. You couldn't get an amendment through even such a convention, let alone out to the floor or out to the states to be ratified. You couldn't repeal Social Security this way. This body wouldn't support that. No other state would support that. Anything that comes out of such a convention is going to have to be middle of the road, directly targeted at problems that everybody agrees that the federal government suffers under. That's regulatory excess. That's a budget that's out of control. That's laws that are clearly not contained within the direction of the Constitution or the purview of the Constitution, the enumerated powers. I would say to the members that have raised so many fears over there that we need to set aside those fears and we need to do the right thing for the people of West Virginia and for the people of the United States. We're the only ones who can do this. Congress is not going to do it. I urge adoption of this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.